How's everybody doing tonight? On behalf of the Fulton Neighborhood Watch, I would like to welcome everybody to our presentation, Understanding Hurricane Harvey. You know, here about June, we were paws and talls discussing what would happen if we had a hurricane. Well, guess what? We had a hurricane. So tonight's going to be very informational. I would really like to thank Brother You and the Fulton Community Church for allowing us to have this, because we don't have a building big enough in Aransas County to house everybody. So I want to thank Fulton Community Church for allowing us to have this. This is put on by the Fulton Neighborhood Watch. We call it Fulton Neighborhood Watch. You don't have to be from Fulton to be a member. We meet the second Tuesday of each month. And the next couple months are going to be kind of interesting. We're going to put something together in January where we're going to bring a bunch of the first responders, and you know, you're going to hear some testimony from the people that actually had the boots on the ground, and that's going to be pretty informational. So without further ado, I would like to introduce a good friend. He is the Chief of Police for the town of Fulton, and he's also the Emergency Manager Coordinator for Aransas County. He sat through this whole deal at the EOC in Aransas County. Ladies and gentlemen, Rick McLester.
Thank you, Russell. You know, a long time ago, you learned as a manager that you're only good as the people you got working for you or with you. And I was blessed to steer the ship that had many folks pulling the oars. And I'm glad to say that here we are today because of those efforts. And I will now forever, when I get before a group like this, I would like to pause a moment and thank some of those unsung heroes before we get into the meat of the program. Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about first responders, we traditionally talk about three groups. So I would like for the Fulton Volunteer Fire Department folks to stand up. If there's anybody with Fulton Volunteer Fire, stand up, please. Stay standing. Remain standing. Remain standing, guys. Anybody here from the Lamar Volunteer Fire Department? Anybody here from the Rockport Volunteer Fire Department? Remain standing. All right. Remain standing, guys. Our second group we'd like to recognize as first responders is anybody here with Allegiance EMS or EMS personnel. Okay, let's give them a round of applause anyway. And our third group, law enforcement. Anybody here with law enforcement connected in any shape, form, or fashion? Local, state, federal, law enforcement, please stand. Let's give those guys a round of applause. Now, remain standing, guys. I'm with you, but hang on. We're going to add two more. I'm going to add two more to this group of boots on the ground and first responders. I would like anybody connected with AEP to please stand. Bob Dubik's over there, please stand. Ladies and gentlemen, they did it too. 14 days, they replaced the entire electrical grid from Corpus Christi past Refugio. Unsung heroes. Now, we had a third group pop in here that they didn't know what they were going to get into until the governor called. I know I've got one representative from TxDOT. Would you please stand if you're from TxDOT in this room? What an army showed up to help us clear those roads. Okay, my last group is not part of the first responders, but I want nobody to leave this room tonight without a question answered about anything associated with Hurricane Harvey. We have a lot of staff here. Mike's here. We've got some of our long-term recovery group. John Jackson's here. You guys, long-term recovery, please stand, because y'all are doing it now and making it right. Thank you, guys. Y'all can sit down now. Now, I've embarrassed this guy before. I get a little sentimental. I get a little choked up on trying to introduce John Metz. In any disaster, there are hundreds and hundreds of folks who are behind the scenes saving lives. I don't know how to say this without looking to John Metz and telling him and thanking him what the National Weather Service did, what his expertise did, what his experience did. But ladies and gentlemen, John Metz is here today to talk about the science of Hurricane Harvey. But I want to introduce my friend, John Metz, and shake his hand one more time. John Metz, you saved lives in Aransas County, and thank you on behalf of Aransas County.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. Amazing crowd. It's hard to know what to say after knowing what you all have gone through and continue to go through in the wake of this disastrous storm. But an amazing community this is. I consider you family. I'm not a resident of Rockport. I live in Corpus Christi, but I'm here on a regular basis with my family enjoying this beautiful coast that we have. And during the height of that storm and even beforehand, very fearful, seeing what was unfolding before our eyes of what could result in this community. And I'm so grateful of just the few fatalities. In fact, 0 direct fatalities after a Category 4 hurricane struck this area directly. And so, a miracle in my book, but just so glad to see all of you here tonight. My presentation is going to walk through the storm. So many want to know what happened. How did this happen? What were the details? And so I'm going to share that with you tonight. We've been gathering information and putting things together and doing programs like this all across the coastal bend. It helps me. It's been an emotional event for me myself, as a meteorologist, preparing communities for such a significant event. And I can't even begin to think how this is affecting you all. If there are questions, again, like Rick said, after the program, by all means, we'll be here as long as it takes to answer any questions you have. Your National Weather Service is here to serve you and to help you. We're located at the airport in Corpus Christi, so come visit sometime and we'll show you the technology used to predict these types of storms. So it's been a few months since the hurricane. Let's walk back to before the storm. Hurricane Harvey began a week before it struck Rockport. All the way out in the Caribbean, at the Leeward Islands, the National Hurricane Center in Miami, they are the hurricane experts tracking the storm. They first identified Harvey out by the Leeward Islands. It was a tropical storm. The track was westward across the Caribbean, and eventually it would reach the Yucatan in their 5-day forecast. But in the discussion, it mentioned the storm's probably going to weaken or dissipate before getting there, and that's what happened. And so there wasn't much to Harvey initially. That was a Friday before landfall, the week before. This is on the 18th of August. We know Harvey struck on the following Friday. All of our models were showing the storm tracking westward. It takes dozens and dozens of models to produce even one of these. And you look at the probabilities, the track was going to be west toward Central America, maybe the Yucatan. Very low probabilities of any potential heading toward Texas. This is the main National Weather Service model. The European model is pretty similar. And the United Kingdom, all showing just maybe 1% chance that this thing could hit Texas. This is 7 days out. But by the following Monday, the storm had migrated over into the western Gulf. Just still a weak area of low pressure, no wind of any significance, just some rain and thunderstorms. And the National Hurricane Center said, be careful, this storm could redevelop as it moves into the Gulf of Mexico. So watch it closely. Get prepared in the event this moves into the Gulf. So this is Monday, and then by the end of the day, Monday, everything changed. That was Monday morning in the previous one. This is Monday afternoon. By Monday afternoon, all the models were showing a track toward Texas. And we knew we had a storm to be concerned about. The very first forecast to go out for Harvey was Wednesday at 10 a.m. That is when Harvey finally redeveloped into a tropical depression. Wind speeds less than 40 miles an hour. The very first forecast from the National Hurricane Center showed a landfall near Rockport, Texas. Initially, we weren't thinking it was going to be that strong. Plan for a Category 1 storm. We always tell everyone, plan for one category higher than forecast as a precaution, because it's tough to predict the intensity of a storm. Sometimes they have a mind of their own. This is a 10 a.m. Wednesday forecast the Hurricane Center put out, and immediately a hurricane watch was hoisted for the Texas coast. That means we're down to 48 hours until the wind starts to blow. 48 hours till tropical storm force conditions begin moving in to our coastal areas. What a difference another 24 hours made. By the next morning, we were very concerned about a major hurricane hitting the Texas coast. The National Hurricane Center increased the forecast to a Category 3 storm hitting Texas. Again, always good to plan for one category higher. That would mean Category 4. Here's the genesis of the storm. So Wednesday morning, the storm was first made into a tropical depression. Here's the bulletin from the National Hurricane Center. Harvey reforms into a depression. On satellite imagery, it did not look very impressive. A few thunderstorm clouds out there, but it had a weak area of low pressure. The winds are 30, 35 miles per hour. By 4 a.m. Thursday morning, hurricane warnings were posted for the Texas coast. How many had their mobile device go off that said hurricane warning? So that is one way that we can deliver those messages directly to you to let you know something serious is coming your way. By 10 a.m. Thursday, it's starting to get better organized, but still only a tropical storm. Tropical Storm Harvey. But at that point, we were forecasting a major hurricane striking the Texas coast, and we had less than 24 hours for that change to take place. That is a huge change in a storm, to go from a tropical storm to a Category 3 or 4 hurricane. If you looked on satellite, it didn't look like that was going to happen. But it did. And by 6 p.m., the Hurricane Hunter plane that flew right over Rockport measured winds 130 miles per hour, a Category 4 storm. So you can see the difference in satellite imagery from a tropical storm to a Category 4. It happened in a very short period of time. 32 hours from tropical storm to Cat 4. The bulletin from the National Hurricane Center. So we have a direct phone line to Miami, to the National Hurricane Center, and we communicate with them every 6 hours minimum to discuss what's potentially coming our way. And that Thursday morning discussion was a little scary. And they were concerned about the intensification of the storm. They were worried rapid intensification would occur. And it was in their discussion as well. Increasing intensity very quickly. We're not going to have that much time for this to occur. All our computer models were showing some intensification, but nothing as strong as Harvey was. A lot of our main global models didn't show a storm as strong as Harvey. This one, neither of these are. Our best new hurricane model did show some rapid intensification and strengthening. So this is what the National Hurricane Center is looking at behind the scenes. But they had high confidence that the storm was going to strengthen. What are we talking about when we consider a Category 4 storm? That's a major hurricane right in the middle of major hurricane status. Winds sustained 130 gusts to 156 miles an hour. It's in that range. That wind speed exceeds our local building codes. Big things happen. Significant damage happens, and we describe the impacts of a storm like that as devastating to catastrophic. Major hurricanes are life-changing events. You all got to experience that, unfortunately, firsthand. This was the forecast. These were the messages that we were putting out. How do we get people to take this seriously? When you look on satellite, it's only a tropical storm. The forecast is calling for devastating to catastrophic wind impacts, complete roof and wall failures. Those are the messages we were putting out. Life-threatening storm surge. The ocean was going to rise up 7 to 12 feet above ground level, potentially impacting low-lying areas. Catastrophic flooding afterwards. These were the oil rigs in the path of the storm as well. A lot was going on offshore, getting people to safety. The intensification process occurred. On satellite imagery, we could see the storm getting stronger very quickly. You can see the eye of the hurricane very vividly here. In the eye of the hurricane, that's the weakest part of the storm. The pressure is very, very low in that eye. It's immediately surrounding the eye wall, where the maximum winds are located. And when we saw this on satellite occurring, very fearful what was about to happen here. On infrared satellite imagery, another view of the storm, seeing these bright red colors represent very powerful thunderstorms. Rising air in these thunderstorms causes a lowering of the pressure below. The lower the pressure, the stronger the wind. The atmosphere keeps itself in balance. Why did it strengthen? 3 things were in place for this storm to intensify. We had very warm waters in the Gulf of Mexico, but not just shallow, it was deep. The warm water extended through a very deep layer, and the hurricane went right over that location. So that warm water fueled the storm. But you need other parameters in place for intensification. Warm water by itself won't do it. You need to have a lot of moisture in the atmosphere. And this green area shows tremendous amounts of moisture surrounding the storm. No dry air was being ingested into this hurricane. And very light winds aloft, very light wind shear. Hurricanes like the atmosphere to be calm so it can make the ruckus. And it certainly did. It was hampered by wind shear for a lot of its life until just this moment moving into the northwestern Gulf of Mexico. So all 3 parameters came together at the last minute for intensification. A view from the National Weather Service. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we're a long ways away. We're at the International Airport in Corpus Christi, nowhere near the center of the storm. That black dot represents our location. You can see the strongest part of the hurricane is here. So we are getting some gusty winds on the outskirts of the storm. But the brave hurricane hunters, these guys are real heroes in this entire hurricane forecast process because they risked their life by flying in the hurricane to measure its intensity so we know what's coming. They flew many, many missions. Here's the paper, it says Harvey on it. This was their flight plan for this particular mission. And so they fly either out of Biloxi, Mississippi, they make a 12-hour flight down to the storm, measuring all of the winds, the radius of the storm, how low is the pressure. And then they fly other missions out of Tampa Bay, Florida. They drop instruments. They were writing Harvey on the drop sondes, and they drop those down to the ocean floor. And so it's measuring information as it's falling. All that is used to go into the computer models to help forecast where the storm is going. So notice how many missions. This is a Florida mission. The plane's coming from Tampa. It gets the data and it goes back. Then coming out of Biloxi, gets the data and flies back. And so back and forth, they're taking turns flying missions into this storm, collecting tremendous amounts of data every few hours, all the way to the coast. The pressure is getting lower and lower, and we're getting that information in real time, and that goes into our bulletins that go out to you. The last mission, they measured the lowest pressure, 938 millibars, a Category 4. And the picture of the eye of the storm that they gathered from the windows of the Hurricane Hunter plane as it sat right off the coast here. A spectacular view, but a fury of wind surrounding it. Back to the National Weather Service, we're launching weather balloons to collect more information about the storm. So we have to launch these every 6 hours. We're collecting information at the coast. It's tough to launch balloons on windy days, but in a hurricane, ridiculous. That was 6 p.m. Friday afternoon. A successful launch. Other folks were in the local area, researchers coming down from Oklahoma, hurricane chasers, you could call them, but these are the scientists. They parked their vehicle at the airport in Refugio and launched weather balloons in the eye of the hurricane, the first time that was ever done, collecting tremendously valuable information about the storm. So a little bit later now, it's time to close the doors at the National Weather Service. Yes, we're not in the peak of the storm, but we had our entire staff, about 24 people, holed up in our office. All the shutters were down and we were ready to ride it out. Then landfall occurs. The radar information was invaluable on being able to track the location and the intensity of the storm. You can see the eye on radar. So here's the radar right here at the airport in Corpus Christi. Is taking pictures every 1 minute of what the storm is doing. Again, the most dangerous part of a hurricane is not the eye, but it is what surrounds the eye, this red area, this eye wall. That is where the maximum wind speeds are located. The most dangerous part of the storm. It's like a 30-mile wide tornado carving a path through the mid-Texas coast. Now, this red area does not go all the way around, but that's a product of attenuation. So there's so much rain that it's actually just blocking our view of the backside of the storm. So you can imagine it's probably red all the way around, so just as intense of a storm on all the quadrants of that hurricane. So it was a direct hit in Aransas, Port Aransas, Aransas Pass, Rockport, Fulton, Lamar, Holiday Beach. These areas took the brunt of the storm. What kind of wind impacts are we talking about? Category 3 and 4, major hurricane winds went right through those communities. But it kept going. Bayside, Woodsboro, Refugio, Ostwell, and Tivoli took a big hit from the winds, those maximum winds in this hurricane. Outside of those areas, the winds were strong, but not as strong as here. Category 2 winds experienced from Ingleside to Gregory and surrounding these areas, sea drift to the north and east. Category 1 force winds in Portland. Corpus Christi, tropical storm force winds. We only had tropical storm conditions in Corpus Christi. There were some gusts to hurricane force, but a huge population missed the full force of that hurricane. This next video, I think, is coming up. All right, so here we are right before landfall. It's 7:30 p.m. Rick and I talked on the phone. We were letting him know that the winds were about to start. It was windy. The storm was strengthening. It was getting closer and closer. But the worst is lurking just offshore. That eye wall is right there. And here's Rockport, Fulton. So he was already thinking about getting out in the eye of the hurricane, maybe trying to perform some rescues. A heroic act, but thinking ahead for your safety, for anyone that stayed, that was here, and riding it out. And we gave him our best guess. We thought between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. in the morning. You might have an hour window inside there to get out to maybe help any folks that might be needing some assistance. This is what it was like. So these storm chasers were in the hotel right down the street from here, just a couple of blocks. These are the wind speeds that were going on right here in Fulton, in Rockport, measured by instruments 150 miles per hour. This video clip, I've only shown you maybe 2 minutes of time, but those winds lasted over 4 hours. 4 hours of extreme hurricane winds in this community. You can watch this online. We give credit to AccuWeather and the storm chasers. Reed Timmer, who was here, this is a YouTube video link that you can share with any family members that you might want to let them know what kind of storm you went through here. So then the first part of the storm passes. That was only the first half. You've got 2.5 hours of those kinds of winds, and then now you're in the eye of the storm, moving right overhead. When the eye goes overhead, it gets calm. Things are quiet. You hear bugs, birds, insects. And that's when Rick and their team went out and tried to help as many people as they can. About a dozen folks were rescued in the eye of the storm and taken to Fulton Elementary School. We let Rick know that it was pretty dangerous immediately surrounding the eye of the hurricane. On radar, we were seeing tornadoes traveling around on the inside perimeter of the eye of the hurricane. The radar measured winds of 228 miles an hour in one of those tornadoes. Here is Rockport Here's Rockport right there. And this is the island, the barrier island out there, San Jose Island. So it was just right across the bay. These violent tornadoes were wrapping around on the inside, right on the inside of the eye of the storm. So you don't want to venture outdoors too soon, because you could be impacted by those incredible winds that could be going around on the inside. Josh Morgerman is one of the storm chasers that was here in town, at the hotel, in fact, where the video was taken. And he had instruments that measured the lowest pressure and tremendous fluctuations in pressure, showing where maybe we had some tornadoes going by. We call those mesovortices. Another team from Florida was here measuring the winds. How did they know to come and set up shop at the airport here in Rockport to measure the winds? They were probably just going off of that 5-day forecast, thinking that, well, there could be a storm maybe coming this way, and drove all the way here. But they set up instruments on the airport here in Rockport, and they measured the best wind data that we have from this hurricane. We see the increasing wind speeds, category 1, 2, 3, 4 on the front side. Then the eye of the hurricane, the winds drop off sharply, all the way down to 10 miles an hour in the eye, and then right back up. Very powerful winds again on the backside, but not as strong. The winds are not measured to be as strong on the backside. Altogether, 4 hours of extreme winds or more here in Rockport. If you go down the coast to Aransas Pass or Port Aransas, they didn't go through the eye. They stayed in the eye wall for 5 solid hours. They never got that break in the middle. But their winds weren't as strong. They were about 130 miles per hour. Here the winds were maxed out at 150 miles per hour. You had 13 hours of hurricane conditions in total here in Rockport. So here's the wind map showing all the very latest data that we have, showing what wind speeds were measured by instruments, reliable instruments across the area. Texas Tech came in from, the university came in and put instruments all the way up and down the coast. We had the folks from Florida, we had the folks from the Severe Storms Laboratory in Oklahoma that put instruments up, and all of those measured some pretty incredible winds. 135 miles an hour measured at Port Aransas and Aransas Pass. 150 was the maximum here in Rockport. But you go across the bay, up toward Refugio and over in Tivoli and Ostwell, they had almost 130 mile an hour winds in those areas. That is double the wind speeds that we had in Corpus Christi or up in Victoria. So unfortunately, you all were right in the epicenter. If you look more closely in the Corpus Christi area, you can see the gradient on how the winds increased. It was just wherever that eye wall was located is where the greatest winds occurred, and the damage correlated to those winds. What kind of impacts were observed? In Corpus Christi, if you looked and drove around, you saw pretty typical of tropical storm or minimal hurricane type conditions. A lot of tree branches down, some shingles missing. But we really dodged a bullet in Corpus Christi. You look out toward the island, the JFK Causeway over to Padre Island, the Holiday Inn Sunspree Resort was significantly damaged, and they are closed for an indefinite period of time as it's rebuilt. Storm surge flooded the low-lying coastal areas around the Packery Channel. The ocean rose up 4 to 6 feet, causing erosion and displaced boats in those areas. Some wholesale roofs were lost in the Corpus Christi area. As you go up the coast, though, Port Aransas took a devastating blow. 5,206 structures, major damage or destroyed, essentially meaning uninhabitable. Tremendous impact of wind and storm surge combined. You can see from the damage, the 8-foot storm surge displaced hundreds of boats, scoured out properties from below. The debris from the ocean storm surge was everywhere. Port Aransas is suffering significantly still and going through the long process of recovery as you are. Other pictures from Port Aransas, the brand new UT Marine Science Institute, built to Category 5, significantly damaged. Water got inside, there's some roof damage, and so they are rebuilding. The drill ship, this drill ship was heading to the valley to be scrap metal and parked in Corpus Christi area for the storm, just didn't make it, and then got loose in the hurricane and caused some damage to the Marine Science Institute. You can see the Coast Guard's facility in Port Aransas significantly damaged, and RV parks, nothing left. Crossing over the intercoastal waterway to Aransas Pass, the winds were about 125 to 130 miles an hour in Aransas Pass. 580 homes essentially uninhabitable after the storm. This community had flooded back in May of the previous year from a severe thunderstorm and a flash flood, and they got flooded again from Harvey. Other scenes from around San Patricio County, mainly in Aransas Pass, and their big water tower in Aransas Pass. The main water supply for the town came down in the storm. These are next to impossible to break. We've seen tornadoes go right over water towers and no collapse, but it came down in Aransas Pass. And it caused its own storm surge as the water rushed out, leveled buildings, cut holes in buildings. So it caused a big flood. And as I was driving here tonight, I saw your big water tower still standing, just a block or two away. But here in Rockport, Key Alegro Marina, significant damage, as you know. The boat barn essentially lost. The hotel, the Marriott right down the street, was brand new, as you know, suffered significant damage from the storm. That's where those storm chasers were held up, collecting that video that I showed. The airport lost 6 out of 12 hangars, significant damage, filled with airplanes. And then on the back side of Rockport and Holiday Beach, so many homes on in the Copano Cove area, just completely lost. 5,200 homes considered major damage or destroyed, essentially uninhabitable here in Rockport. 14,000 structures damaged in total. Scenes from the backside of Rockport along the Copano Bay area. That was the hardest hit area that I could see in our damage assessments through the area. It was likely caused by those very strong winds in that eye wall blowing across Copano Bay, unimpeded, because it's just a clear shot across the water. And so then it impacted all those homes along the waterfront, and they took the full force. Storm surge was in that area too, very strong. And so the impacts to all those homes and structures along Copano Bay are a result of those winds of 150 miles an hour and a big 5 to 7 foot storm surge. Just tremendous losses in these areas. The airport, again, half of the hangars destroyed. Crossing the bridge over to Lamar Peninsula. If you haven't been over there, a lot of oak trees like you have here in Rockport. Beautiful area around Goose Island State Park, where the old tree is, the 1,000-year-old oak tree, just brutalized by the wind. And that's what you see all across this area. The trees really tell the story about what happened. And so just so much of a loss in the vegetation across the area. A local resident from Lamar sent me this picture before and after, showing the vegetation over their home before the storm and then after. Homes that you didn't know were hiding back in the woods all of a sudden became visible. Then the storm went to Refugio, and they took a devastating blow there as well. 1,500 homes uninhabitable after the storm. And you'll see it as you drive through there on your way to Victoria or Houston. They are going through a long recovery and cleanup process as you are. And now the debris, tremendous amounts. We see it on the highway. So many millions of cubic yards being picked up. Rick tells me the first pass is over 90% picked up so far, so there's over 2 million cubic yards of debris that's been accumulated. And so I understand there's piles on the freeway, and there's a whole bunch behind the airport as well, which is where the real piles are, and most of this is going to the Corpus Christi landfill. These scenes of debris are visible in Aransas Pass too, and Port Aransas. So many communities, homes, and lives disrupted by this storm. But we got a little blessing on top of it for a day. All I can say is the snow was beautiful. And it's typical of South Texas. It doesn't stay very long, but that's okay. We enjoy it while it lasted. So in total, we estimate, based on all the statistics that have been collected through the work of emergency managers like Rick all across this area, that about 40,000 structures were damaged, mostly homes in the area had damage from Hurricane Harvey, which is a huge number of families disrupted. 15,000 suffering major damage or destroyed. That is essentially uninhabitable after the storm. 15,000 families displaced. Hurricane Celia in 1970 that took a direct hit on Corpus Christi, the number was 10,000. So you've topped that storm. And that's a statistic you probably didn't want. In total, we estimate, based on all the insurance numbers that have come in so far, working through the Insurance Council of Texas, we estimate $4.5 billion in damage here in the Coastal Bend. Most of that is windstorm losses, but there are flood losses worked in there as well from storm surge and then agricultural losses. These are just estimates, and these will likely change. This is the miraculous number, though. I don't know how that happened. But thank God, no significant loss of life here in the Coastal Bend. We did a lot of assessments the following days and weeks after the storm. All the pictures and documentation of the hurricane are on our website. Just go to weather.gov/Corpus Christi, and you can access all this information I'm sharing with you tonight. But you can get pictures of all the different homes across the area and the type of damage that was observed there. So let's talk about the storm surge. The water rose up in the ocean too. And so as the hurricane made landfall, those winds spinning around the eye wall moved the water around pretty abruptly in the intercoastal waterways and in Copano Bay, San Antonio Bay, Lavaca Bay. The biggest surge impacts were in Copano Bay on the backside, as we talked about. 7 feet of storm surge we observed in Holiday Beach, and 5 to 7.5 feet back in the Copano Ridge areas along the backside of Rockport. So pretty significant storm surge impacts. On the front side of Rockport and Fulton, along Fulton Beach Road, just right down the bottom of the hill here, about a 4-foot surge was the maximum that we saw. The water was moving this way, down the coastline because of the strong winds blowing this direction. And so it pushed all this water down the coast, and it hit the back of Port Aransas and gave them a big 8-foot storm surge on the back side of the island. But it also, the winds coming this direction, pushed a huge 12.5-foot surge over the Aransas Wildlife Refuge right in this area, and a 9-foot surge all the way up San Antonio Bay toward Victoria. It went all the way up the barge canal. There were dozens of boats taking shelter in the barge canal all the way up to the turning basin in Victoria. And they witnessed a 9-foot surge go all the way up the barge canal. A 10-foot surge in Port Lavaca. So this thing moved a lot of ocean water and bay water across the area. All of our tide gauges up and down the coast measured those water levels as well, but they're more out in the bay, and the highest values were on land, and so these aren't going to capture those maximum values. But you could see it in the debris lines. Here in Port Lavaca, you could see where the 10-foot tidal surge pushed ocean water and that debris all the way up the embankment. Here, Fulton and Rockport, you can see Holiday Beach, the ocean water just punched holes right through the lowest levels of the structures in Holiday Beach and the Copano Ridge areas. That storm surge can be deadly. It moves so much water so quickly. On the Fulton Beach Road right down on the shore, not as much of a surge, about 4 feet. It just got up over the roadway and caused some erosion there. The maximum surge was at the Aransas Wildlife Refuge, where it came up 12.5 feet. In Port Aransas, 8-foot storm surge, we could see the high water marks were well over our heads. And that's all through Port Aransas. So ocean water got into many, if not most of the properties in Port Aransas. Boats that were down in the marina were put up on dry ground. That's an 8-foot rise there. The University of Texas in Austin runs a high-resolution storm surge model, and they provided this to us after the storm, so we could kind of see the simulation of what the storm surge looked like as the hurricane made landfall. It's just a computer simulation. But it was probably pretty realistic on how the ocean behaved as the hurricane hit the coast. You can see the big buildup of water on the Aransas Wildlife Refuge. You can see how it impacted Holiday Beach, and Highway 35 got completely flooded if you're driving from Lamar all the way up toward the Ostwell, Tivoli areas. And also you can see on the back side in the Copano Village area, all of these areas got inundated with the water from Copano Bay. So that's salt water pushing into these areas. So watch it again. Look at that big storm surge right here. So if you add it up and look at the inundation, how deep the water got at any one of those locations, you can see this is the inundation map. Again, it's just a simulation, but it actually was pretty accurate based on our assessment. It was probably a little bit low and didn't extend quite far enough inland in some of the observations that we saw, but this is a pretty good estimate of what the ocean did during Harvey, and you can see the impacts here. So I have the link to this website that anybody can access. It's all online. And so this presentation will be shared tonight, so that if anyone wants access to it, I'll share it with Rick, so we'll make sure you know how to get it and you can pull up this data. NOAA flew airplanes just a day or two after the storm hit to see how bad was bad, what kind of impacts occurred. And so there were overflights over this whole region, and we could immediately see, like in the Copano Ridge area, all the lost structures. Just again, that was the hardest hit area where so many structures disappeared from the wind and the water. Same with Key Allegro. You could zoom into any location. I just picked two just to show you. There's the marina devastated, but a lot of roofs missing from homes in this area. If you go out along the barrier island, San Jose Island, it's uninhabited. Nobody lives out there for the most part, but it created, the storm surge made 14 new cuts. So it completely changed the face of the Texas coast. And if you go a little further north at Port O'Connor, a 1,000-foot hole was created in the beach line in the Matagorda Island. So that's a big change in the face of Texas here because of Harvey. So how does Harvey rank? It was the first Category 4 hurricane to hit Texas since 1961. So it had been a long time. Carla was the last Category 4 to hit Texas. The United States had been in a major hurricane drought for a dozen years. On average, a major hurricane hits the United States every 3 years. But we had gone 12 years without a major hurricane, and so Harvey broke that gap, which, boy, we sure appreciate that one. Tropical depression to major hurricane in 40 hours, rapid intensification. And it is ranked as the 17th strongest landfalling storm in the United States. The one that hit Florida was a little stronger, so it bumped us down one notch, but it's based on pressure of 938 millibars. The peak winds were measured 150 miles an hour here in the airport in Rockport, and the maximum storm surge 12.5 feet, right up the coast at the Aransas Wildlife Refuge. Social media was big in helping inform people what was going on during the storm. And we would post things to social media, updates on the storm, and we had about close to 9 million impressions on Twitter. So that is a very powerful way to get information during a significant weather event like a hurricane. So we recommend you follow our Twitter page to stay updated on the storm. But did it work during and after? No. Power's out, internet's down, cell phone towers aren't working. So there's limitations to that, obviously. So that was part one. The second half of the storm moved up the coast and caused a tremendous flood in the Houston area. The thing is we were thinking that flood was going to be here. All of our model simulations showed 25 to 30 inches of rain falling here in Rockport and all the way up to Victoria. If this happened, not only would we have had the windstorm that we did, but we would have had record flooding from fresh water falling out of the sky and hitting the ground here as well. So a little blessing, maybe. So as the storm moved inland and impacted you here in Rockport, it then continued on inland. It was the slow motion that resulted in the winds lasting as long as they did. Most hurricanes, when they hit, they blast on through. You might have an hour of the most extreme winds, but here it was 4 to 5 hours. Then the storm stalled to the north and dumped tremendous amounts of rain from near Austin to Houston. So the rainfall totals day one, you did have a good 15 to 20 inches of rain here. Then second day, the rains were from Austin to Houston. Third day, same area, Austin to Houston. Fourth day, all Houston. So when you add up the totals for the rainfall, Houston had over 60 inches of rain, a new U.S. rainfall record. They held the original record. Now they have the new record. Imagine this happening here. I don't even want to think about it. So it caused flooding on rivers. Victoria, Guadalupe River hit the second highest flood on record. Second highest flood up in Cuero. Rivers were flowing. The Colorado River was in significant, almost record flood. There's a recliner up in a tree from the flood waters that passed through. People had water in their homes from rivers that got out of their banks. But it's what happened in Houston that was the most catastrophic. The National Weather Service in Houston, that we work closely with, has 67 river forecast points in their area in southeast Texas. 31 set all-time records. The water was unbelievable. 6.5 million people had over 30 inches of rain. Houston was water everywhere. There were 155,000 homes flooded. A tremendous number. 250,000 vehicles. Did you see this statistic? 80% of the flood victims had no flood insurance. A lesson for all of us in Texas along the coast. I highly recommend flood insurance, whether you are in a flood zone or not. So a tremendous impact when Harvey hit. You guys had the wind and storm surge. Houston had the rain and flooding. An amazing statistic, one little fun fact, from 1 trillion gallons of rainwater that fell from the sky in Harvey, which would run Niagara Falls for 15 days, caused the city of Houston to sink by 2 centimeters. That's big. Now it's even lower than it was before, and probably more flood prone. But it wasn't just Houston. It was all of southeast Texas, all the way to Port Arthur and into Louisiana. Harvey was a disastrous event. In total, we don't know how much the damages are going to be. Some estimates put it over $200 billion if you factor in all the uninsured flood losses. But again, they're just estimates and those numbers will change, but it's likely Harvey will be the costliest storm in U.S. history. So, it was a busy hurricane season. The predictions from NOAA showed we anticipated somewhere between 14 and 19 named storms, we had 17. 5 to 9 hurricanes, we had 10. 2 to 5 big ones, major hurricanes, we had 6. In total, all these storms racked up almost $360 billion in damages. So many lives were lost in the Atlantic hurricane basin this year. But we can be proud here locally from such a low loss of life. So just wanted to share one more fact with you. So are we done? We've had our storm, now we're good for 50 years. I hope so. I'd never want to do that again. I'm sure you don't either. I went back and looked at the records and statistics on hurricanes and found that back in the 1900s, 1909 to 1919, that 10-year period, there were 4 major hurricanes to hit Texas that decade. Boy, I hope we're not starting one of those. We had 2 big ones back to back in the 40s, right on the mid-Texas coast. 4 in the 60s and 70s, from Carla, 1961, to Beulah, 1967, to Celia and Fern back to back. That was a rough 10-year period. So we always need to be prepared. Thank you all for having me this evening. We'll be up here. Rick, if you have any last closing comments.
Ladies and gentlemen, it just doesn't get any better than John Metz. A couple of things before we close. And again, I would clearly do not leave here unless you've got questions, or don't leave here with questions. I normally don't like to single out the acts of a single group because it was everybody. A lot of boots on the ground, a lot of things happened, a lot of lives were saved. But I'd like to ask, is Johnny, Matt, or Rudy from Fulton here? If y'all are, stand up. I don't know if they were going to make it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my Fulton crew. Of course, my fire department's here with us too. And of course, all my Fulton law enforcement staff is out patrolling the streets of Fulton right now, trying to keep y'all safe. But that group at Fairfield Inn that John Metz mentioned, they personally walked 40 survivors when the hotel became damaged to the extent that they thought it was going to collapse. They literally walked in the eye, 40 survivors, through all the down power lines, all the poles, along with the Fulton Fire Department leaving the Fulton Fire Station and made it to the Fulton Elementary to seek shelter. That's leadership. That's folks that you just don't, they're there when you need them. You don't know it, you don't expect it, but I'm so proud of those folks, the fire department, the Fulton staff. I wish they were here to give us recognition, but please, a round of applause to those folks that did it. And now the last part of my presentation, before we get into question and answers, I'm going to leave you with a thought. A lot of departments mandate critical instant debriefing by the experts. We did that here. We had 3 different groups come in to offer their services. We started with our dispatch staff. We didn't talk about those folks. I mentioned them in law enforcement. They're part of our family. But ladies and gentlemen, it starts and stops with the dispatcher. The person on the other end of the phone with 911. And those folks had some tragedy that went through those phone lines. When you're sitting there talking to a lady that's 70 years old and her roof just collapsed and she's got blood running down her face, and she's saying, please come rescue me. And the answer is we can't. We cannot come. 135 mile an hour winds blowing. Your house just collapsed. We cannot come. For 20 years I've preached, folks, we don't want to put they're going to come. If you raised your hand and you're an emergency first responder in Aransas County, I would have over 120 volunteers if I said, I need a rescue. But ladies and gentlemen, nobody here wants to put our law enforcement, our paramedics, our firemen in the line of that kind of stuff. And is it actually safe? Or is it physically possible to drive a fire truck through 5 foot of water with winds blowing 130 miles an hour? Dispatchers had to take that 911 call and say, we can't come. One got put on a speakerphone. We all sat there with our mouths open. Bless that dispatcher. She handled it professionally. But we made it a point to have critical debriefing by those folks. And I want to leave you with the most profound statement that the critical debriefer that I spoke to said. Ladies and gentlemen, Hurricane Harvey happened. It's in your memories. It'll be with you for the rest of your life. And that's okay. Just don't let it become where you're reliving it every day. It's okay to remember. You can't forget it. But do not relive it. One last round of applause for John Metz. You saved lives, John Metz. Love the National Weather Service.